So, like I said, we're finalizing our study on the introductory stage of biblical theology. And lately we've been talking about the biblical basis for typology. We've been talking about symbolism. We've been talking about all of the prefigurations in the Old Testament. Basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take this book and make it smaller for you. How do I interpret this book? What is the big picture? That's what we're studying in this whole series. And after this week, we're going to start looking at themes throughout the whole Bible. Themes from Genesis to Revelation. Themes like marriage. How does marriage start from Genesis, end in Revelation? How does that point to Jesus Christ? The concept is basically, there are people out there who, when they interpret the Old Testament, when they see a New Testament author interpreting the Old Testament, they say that what they're doing is they are adding meaning to the Old Testament. They are altering the meaning of the Old Testament, altering, changing the fulfillment of Old Testament promises when they come to the New Testament and New Testament promises. The people of Israel, they failed and the situation changed, so we have to take all those promises and we have to fit them into our situation, the situation for the church. And I really don't think that that does justice to the message of the Bible. I don't think that that does justice to 80% of our Bible, and I don't think that that does justice to the way that the authors of the New Testament interpret the Old Testament. So what I want to do really briefly is use the book of Hebrews as a case study for how we should interpret the Old Testament, very simply. So if you're wondering, where am I? What am I doing? You really need one of these because especially when I take a detour, you're going to get totally lost if you're not following me along. So let's take a little bit of a rabbit trail and let's open up the book of Hebrews so that we can see a case study of how the Bible tells us that we should interpret the Old Testament. First, please look with me at Hebrews chapter 1 and look at verse 1. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers in the prophets, in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things. I'm going to assume during this detour that Paul wrote Hebrews, because it's so much easier to say Paul than the author to the Hebrews, or the author of the book of Hebrews. That's so many words. So bear with me, I'm going to call him Paul. Paul, in Hebrews chapter 1, lays out two modes of revelation, two periods of revelation. So, really quick, when did these periods of revelation take place? Well, notice in verse 1 it says, he spoke long ago. And in verse 2, he spoke in these last days. Two different time periods for revelation. Notice, secondly, who he's speaking to. God, after he spoke long ago, to the fathers. Who are the fathers? The ancestors of, Israelites, modern day Israelites in the first century. Their ancestors, the patristics, and most preeminently Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the fathers. God spoke long ago to the fathers. In these last days, he has spoken to us. Who's the us? It's the church, right? So we're seeing he's dichotomizing two forms of revelation. And in what manner does God reveal? Verse 1, in many portions, he spoke in the prophets. He's speaking about that old revelation. And he says, in many portions and in many ways did he speak. So what I want to do, he doesn't say anything about the manner of revelation for Jesus Christ. And I think there's a reason for that. He says back then they spoke in many portions and many ways. In these last days he's spoken to us in his Son. And he doesn't really, he doesn't say, and his Son spoke in many portions and in many ways. Some people take that phrase, many portions, many ways, and they take that to mean like he spoke with visions, he spoke by a donkey. He spoke with a hand that was writing on the wall. He spoke in many portions, in many ways. I don't think that that's what that means. I think it includes that, but I think that we have to allow Paul in the book of Hebrews to define what many portions and many ways of Old Testament revelation is. Does that make sense? You guys tracking? We're talking about revelation. How are we supposed to look at Old Testament revelation? Old Testament revelation is written in many portions and in many ways. So what does that mean, Paul? Look at Hebrews chapter 3. And all we're going to do is I'm going to try to just walk through Hebrews when he, not comprehensively, but when he addresses this issue of Old Testament revelation and how it's fulfilled. Look at Hebrews 3 and look at verse 5. Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant. What does it mean? What does it mean in all his house? And what does it mean that he was a servant? That's a good interpretive question. I think all his house, I think that's just speaking about the house of Israel. He was a servant to the house of Israel. And what was Moses' service? I think he was a mediator. He was an intercessor. He was a go-between. And he mediated the old covenant to the people of Israel, to the house of Israel, right? So Moses was faithful in all of that. He was faithful in all his house as a servant. For what purpose was Moses a servant as a mediator of the old covenant in the house of Israel? Why did he do it? Why did God have him do it? 5b. It was for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. God spoke long ago in the prophets in many portions and in many ways. And in one of those portions, in one of those ways, he spoke in the service of Moses. It wasn't only in what Moses wrote, but it was in his service. It's in what he did, right? And what did God reveal in the service of Moses? It was a testimony of things to be spoken later. In these last days has spoken to us in his Son, right? Do you see that? Moses' servant was for a testimony of the apostolic message. That's the point I'm trying to make, okay? It was for us. Look at Hebrews chapter 8. Hebrews chapter 8. And look down at verse 4. Now, if Jesus Christ were on earth, is Jesus Christ on earth? No, he's not. Now, if Jesus Christ were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are those who offer the gifts according to the law. They serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. Notice that there are those who offer the gifts according to the law. Is that Jesus Christ? That's a good question. No, it's not. Jesus Christ, this is a fact that's already established in the book of Hebrews. Look at, really quick, flip to the left, Hebrews 7, verse 28. For the law appoints men as high priests who are weak, but the word of the oath, which came after the law, appoints a son made perfect forever. So Jesus wasn't a priest. He isn't a priest according to the law. He's a priest according to the word of promise, according to the word of oath, which is, how does he say it? You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. That is the word of oath. And that's the manner after which Jesus Christ is a priest. So what about the Old Testament priests? What did they serve? Verse 5. They served a copy of something. They served a shadow of something. Just as Moses was warned by God when he was about to erect the tabernacle, for see, he says, that you make all things according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. So the whole Levitical system, the whole sacrificial system, the whole priesthood, all of its service, Moses as a servant, all of it was a service for a copy of something. A replica of something else. They were serving a replica of a heavenly reality. You say, okay, well, what about Jesus? Did he serve a copy? No, he served the substance, right? He was a priest according to heavenly realities that the Old Testament priesthood was patterned after. Does that make sense? Let's keep reading. Look at Hebrews chapter 9. And if we had time, then we could go to Hebrews 9, verses 6 through 10. and even down to 14. But I'm just going to skip to 23 because there's an important point here. Hebrews 9:23. Therefore, it was necessary for the copies, you see that word, it just keeps coming up, right? The word copies keeps coming up in this book. There's something being copied, being replicated. Therefore, it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these. Really good interpretive questions, right? Really good interpretive questions I can ask. What's being copied? What's being cleansed? What are these that are cleansing something? Well, notice that at the very beginning of the verse he says, therefore, which indicates that there's a discussion going on this whole time. He's not just beginning a conversation. So let's go back a little bit. Look at verse 21. It says, in the same way, Moses sprinkled both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry with the blood. And according to the law, one may almost say, all things are cleansed with blood. So when Paul says in verse 23, it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be cleansed with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. When he's talking about being cleansed, he's talking about being cleansed with blood, you see. I think that's very clear from the context. Verse 22, according to the law, one may almost say all things are cleansed with blood. So when he says it was necessary for the copies to be cleansed with this blood, what he's indicating to you is that whatever he says in the preceding context that was cleansed with the blood of bulls and goats is a copy of something, right? I think that's the argument that he's making. So here's the question. What's being cleansed with blood? If I know what's being cleansed with blood, then I know what a copy is. And I know that it's supposed to be pointing to the reality of something else, right? Are you guys following? Okay, all right. Hebrews 9 can be crazy. It's a difficult chapter, but I want to guide you through this. Hebrews 9, look at verse 18. We're looking at what's being cleansed with blood, right? Because that's what a copy is. Verse 19. For when every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people according to the law, he took the blood of the calves and the goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop. He's about to cleanse something. And he sprinkled both the book itself. Stop. The book. The Old Covenant book, right? A covenant is like a contract. And if you're a lawyer, you're not going to make a contract with somebody verbally. You're going to put it in writing. And that's what God does. This is the Old Covenant. And it's cleansed with the blood of calves and goats and rams and lambs. It inaugurates the covenant. You see? So look, the book. So here's the question. We know that the book is cleansed with the blood of these beasts. So in what sense is that book a copy? What is it replicating? What is it patterned after? Well, it's patterned after another book. It's patterned after the New Covenant book, right? I think that's very clear from the context. That, by the way, if you're not aware, that has massive ramifications. It means that everything prior to Matthew chapter 1 is patterned after everything after Malachi, I think 6, however many chapters are in that book. Everything that is prior to Matthew 1 is patterned after everything that is after Malachi 6. The Old Covenant is a copy of the New Covenant, right? Let's keep reading. What else is a copy? He sprinkled both the book itself and, get this, all the people. The people are a copy? Yeah. Okay. So if the people are copied with the blood of the Old Covenant, verse 23, it says, the heavenly things themselves are cleansed with better sacrifices than these. The copy is cleansed with the blood of calves and goats and rams and lambs and bulls. What is the reality cleansed with? A better sacrifice. There is a copy of the New Covenant people that is cleansed with the copy of Jesus' sacrifice. Really big ramifications, guys, for the way that you're going to interpret your Old Testament. The Old Covenant people are a copy of the New Covenant people. He wrote the Old Covenant for us to see ourselves in the way that we can see a picture of ourselves, a shadow of ourselves, a copy of ourselves. In Old Testament, take Daniel, for example. Daniel was sacrificially, ritually cleansed with the blood of calves and goats and rams, right? In the way that he was cleansed with that blood, he was a copy of me who's cleansed by better blood. You see? What else is a copy? Both the book itself and all the people saying, "This is the blood of the covenant which God commanded you," verse 21. And in the same way, he sprinkled both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry with blood. So apparently the tabernacle and the vessels of the ministry with the blood are also a copy of something else. You see. What is the heavenly tabernacle? Well, Jesus Christ enters into it, and he sprinkles his own blood. You see. That's a lot to digest, but I just want you to see that God spoke long ago in many portions and in many ways. But in these last days, he's spoken very straightforwardly to us in his Son. What are the many portions and many ways? Copies, prefigurations, shadows. Look at Hebrews chapter 10. Look at verse 1. For the law, since it has only a shadow of the good things to come. What is the law? What is he referring to? He's referring to the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, right? It's shorthand to say all those books of the Old Testament. It's shorthand. And if you want to be very specific, it means the first 5 books of the Bible. But they said it like, they used that word, the law, to refer to everything that had been written for the people of Israel, the Old Testament. The law, or the Pentateuch, or the whole Old Testament, since it has only a shadow of the good things to come. What are good things to come? Heavenly realities, right? That's the whole argument of the book of Hebrews, is that the Old Testament contained only a shadow of the good things to come, and not the very substance, not the very form of things. And they can never, by the same sacrifices which they offer continually year by year, make perfect those who draw near, because they're only copies meant to point forward to a better sacrifice that actually can save you. Jesus Christ is your only hope. Look to him in the copies and in the shadows and the prefigurations of Old Testament sacrifices, just like they did. Use the pattern of, I need to move on because we're not going to get to canonics this morning. Look at the pattern and see Jesus Christ. When they put their hands, in Exodus chapter 12, when they put their hands on that beast, and they slayed that beast, that's a picture of penal substitutionary atonement. They put their hands on it, and they killed it, identifying themselves with it. We, as it were, when we exercise faith, we put our hands on the head of Jesus Christ, and he's slaughtered on our behalf. Amen? All right, I'm not going to go to those other verses because we need to move forward. Okay. So let's get into canonics. Why is the Bible split in 2? That was all a digression. What is canonics? What is canon? You may have heard that word before. I'm not talking about like a Civil War weapon. It was probably intimidating at the time, but I don't know. It just doesn't seem... I'm not talking about that kind of canon. I'm talking about a measure or a rule. Look at the top of your outline. What's the definition? Canon, with one N, is a word that means a collection or list of sacred books accepted as genuine. R.C. Sproul one time, he said something I think that was really wise. He said, our canon of Scripture is not an authoritative list of books, but it is a list of authoritative books. I think that's a really good way to put it. What is a canon? It's a list of books that we have in the Bible. That's what the canon is. So when we're talking about canonical structure, I'm talking about how do all of the books fit together and contribute to the whole? How is the Bible structured according to all of these different books, this list of books in the Bible? You see? That's what we're getting after in this lesson. So here's a really good question. Why is the Bible split in 2? Is there actually a biblical basis for Old Testament and New Testament? And as we've hinted at already from Hebrews chapter 9, there is a biblical basis for it. And I didn't mean to go to Hebrews 9 twice, but open up to Hebrews chapter 9. Open up to Hebrews chapter 9. We already talked about 2 Corinthians 3 in a previous lesson, which basically says that at the reading of the Old Covenant, the people of Israel have hardened hearts. But the point of that text is that you can read the Old Covenant. The Old Covenant is contained in a body of literature. Same with the New Covenant. Look at Hebrews chapter 9 and look at verse 15. For this reason, Jesus Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, so that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions that were committed under the first covenant. Stop. Let me walk you through this. How were Old Testament saints saved? Were they saved by beasts being slaughtered? No. In Psalm chapter 40, it says, my brother couldn't even take my place, right? God doesn't delight in sacrifices. They weren't saved by that. There was somebody who was typified by that. And by his sacrifice, they were saved. Look at verse 15. Jesus Christ is the mediator of a new covenant. Why? So that since a death has taken place for the redemption of the transgressions committed under the first covenant. So David, he committed adultery with Bathsheba, right? Whose death saved him? Christ's death. That's why Jesus became a mediator of the new covenant. And therefore, David was saved by virtue not of the old covenant, but he was saved by virtue of the new covenant, right? Jesus, for this reason, is the mediator of a new covenant, so that Old Testament transgressions could be forgiven. You see? Okay, I hope you're following. Here's why he became the mediator of the new covenant, so that those who have been called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. David was called, right? Okay. Verse 16. This word covenant, look at your outline. Next to number 1 where it says why is the Bible split in two, you'll see this really weird word, diatheke. That is the Greek word for covenant. And there's actually a better word for covenant in Greek. It's suntheke. It means to make an agreement with or a contract with. Sun, it means with. Diatheke is a word that can mean a covenant, and it can also mean a will and testament. Like somebody's growing old and they're like, oh man, I'm going to die. I need to leave my inheritance to my children so it doesn't go to the government or wherever. So I'm going to write a will and testament. And it's in writing. That's what this is. You see? That's what this is. It's a covenant. It's a covenant document. It is a will and a testament that contains the inheritance for a people who will benefit from someone's death. Right? It's crazy. I was like, oh man, that's awesome when I figured out about that. Okay, so where a covenant or where a will and a testament, right? Where a will and a testament is, there must of necessity be the death of the one who made it. For a will and testament is valid only when men are dead. You don't get your inheritance before somebody dies unless you're the prodigal son, okay? You wait for them to die and then you get it, okay? A covenant is valid only when men are dead, for it is never enforced while the one who made it lives. Therefore, even the first covenant was not inaugurated without blood. The first will and testament was not inaugurated without blood. What's he referring to when he says the first one? The old covenant, right? Okay, you're tracking. Verse 19. For when every commandment had been spoken by Moses, where do you find Moses' commandments? The Old Testament, right? When every commandment had been spoken by Moses to all the people according to the law, where do you find the law? Old Testament. He took the blood of the calves and the goats with water and scarlet wool and hyssop and sprinkled both the book itself. So where do we find the Old Covenant? It's a book. It's a book. So that's why the early church called this the Old Will and Testament. And that's why they called this the New Will and Testament. Does that make sense? Okay, so there is a biblical basis for our Bible being split in half. And we're not going to go to 2 Corinthians 3. We did that previously, although briefly. So what is the structure of each half? I'm going to focus mostly on the Old Testament structure, because you'll see the New Testament structure in that. Look at Luke chapter 24. And I'm going to try to leave questions for the end. I really hope that I can. Okay, we got time. Luke 24. And look down at verse 27. Look at verse 27. It says, "Then, beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures." Is there a mic? Okay, cool. I just want to ask you a question. How did Israelites divide the Old Testament? They structured it. They had it divided into certain sections. How did they do that? I'm sorry? Yeah, the law and the prophets. And there's one more section too. The writings, yes. And you can refer to it as the Psalms as well. Those of you online, there were so many people answering this question that the mic just couldn't go to them all. Okay. The Old Testament is divided into Moses, which was the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. We also call that the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then the next section is the prophets, which is made up of the former prophets, which is the history, and the latter prophets, which is the major and the minor prophets. And then the last section is the writings, which is mostly made up of wisdom literature, poetic literature, some apocalyptic literature like Daniel. So they split the Old Testament into these 3 categories: Moses and the prophets and the writings. Jesus, or actually Luke here in verse 27, approves of that division. Beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in all the scriptures. I take that word scriptures to actually mean writings because it's the same word. And it just makes sense to me that he would be using that word to mean writings in this context, in this immediate context, rather than the word scriptures, okay? But they mean the same thing. He's approving of that division. Now look again at verse 44, he approves of it again. Jesus Christ does. "Now Jesus said to them," his disciples, he said to his disciples, "These are my words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things which are written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets," and guess what book of the writings begins with? The Psalms. He's referring to all 3 divisions, right? If you want another example, you can go to it later. It's in Matthew chapter 23. Jesus says that all the blood from righteous Abel to Zechariah will fall upon that generation. And Zechariah wasn't the last martyr to die. He wasn't the last one to be persecuted. But according to the divisions of the Old Testament, he was. The Old Testament didn't used to be chronological, more or less as it is now. The Old Testament was divided for theological purposes in that way. And so Zechariah was the quote-unquote last prophet. So when he says from Abel to Zechariah, what he's saying is every single martyr in the Old Testament from beginning to end, all their blood is going to fall upon you. But when he uses Zechariah as the end, he's saying that because of the divisions of the Old Testament back then. I don't know who our last martyr is, but it wasn't Zechariah. He wasn't the last one to die. So hope that makes sense. The Old Testament is divided into 3 sections. Now, take your paper and flip it over. I want you to see the appendix here. This is how you can divide up the Old Testament. Look at the column headings. You can divide it into the law, the prophets, and the writings. Under the law, you have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Under the prophets, you have former and latter prophets. So the former prophets are history, right? A lot of history. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. The latter prophets are Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the 12. And if you're familiar with one of those songs floating around out there that helps you to know the order of the Old Testament, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. That's not how the Old Testament is ordered. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, so far so good. Joshua, Judges, Ruth? But where's Ruth here? It's in the writings. The writings are Psalms, Job, Proverbs, Ruth. Ruth took place later, so why is Ruth being placed after Proverbs and before Song of Songs? I think there are theological reasons why it was put there. For one, what is the last thing that Proverbs talks about? The excellent wife. And then you have Ruth. And what comes after Ruth? Song of Songs! So I think there were theological reasons why they put books where they did. And somebody came after. His name was Jerome, not Pastor Jerome. Thankfully, we don't have to blame him. But there was a man whose name was Jerome, and he ordered the Old Testament in the way that we have it now. And we don't need to hate on him or indict him for doing anything wrong. The order of books isn't necessarily inspired, but it was put in that order for a reason originally. And I think it was approved by Jesus and Luke. So with all of that said, take a closer look at this appendix, and you'll see that the Old Testament was patterned after the New Testament, even according to its structure. There's a covenant prologue, Genesis. The book of Genesis is exceedingly important for understanding the rest of your Old Testament and the rest of the Bible. And the Bible pulls in a lot of themes from Genesis and ties a nice bow on them in the book of Revelation. And the book of Revelation is what we're going to call our covenant epilogue. You can call them whatever you want, but the structure, I think, is legitimate. The law, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. What is the corresponding new covenant equivalent of that? Thank you. What's the new covenant equivalent? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Why? Why are the Gospels given the same preeminence for the new covenant that the law was given for the old covenant? It's because it was the basis upon which the people were in covenant relationship with God, you see. In the Old Testament, what you have is the message of the law, which is, this is my relationship with you. This is the covenant document that you are going to obey. In the former prophets, you have a history of them not doing that. You have a history of them disobeying. In the latter prophets, you have the indictment. You've disobeyed, therefore you'll be exiled. And there are promises of a future restoration as well in the latter prophets, okay? But that's pretty much the message. And then in the writings, you have commentary going on from the perspective of the people. So that's kind of why they had them divided like that. Look at the New Testament. You have the Gospels. Isn't that our foundational covenant document that provides us with the basis upon which we're going to be in covenant relationship with God? Right? I'm in covenant relationship with God because of the Gospels, because of what Jesus came to do, you see? Is there a new covenant history like the former prophets that we have? Yeah, the Acts of the Apostles, or the Acts of the risen Lord Jesus Christ. I think that's a better title for that. A good question that I haven't really sorted out yet is is Acts also corresponding to the latter prophets? There are those who say that do, and this book says that they do. This is a book I recommend for all of your Old Testament studies. If you're going through the Old Testament and you want a biblical theology to go along with it, this book is really good. The introduction especially is fantastic. So if you want canonics, the introduction is great. But if you just want something to go through your whole Old Testament, this is a great book. I don't know how much it costs. It's probably really expensive. $50, okay. But it's a really good book. Read everything except for Ecclesiastes. He did a terrible job. Okay. This one is a biblical theological introduction to the Old Testament. This book is also really good on canonics. He kind of assumes it a little bit, and he walks you through the Old Testament. It's shorter. It's a little more technical. Again, the book that I would most highly recommend on all of this stuff is that little tiny book by James Hamilton. It's easy. He speaks straightforwardly. It's not super technical, but it takes the Bible and it just shrinks it, and you see all these connections. He does a really great job. So this book, like I was saying, this one, a biblical theological introduction to the Old Testament. In the introduction, what he talks about, he basically makes the argument that the latter prophets are also corresponding to the Acts, because in Acts you have the apostles indicting the people for all kinds of things in their speeches. So, but I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, I don't know if the latter prophets also correspond to the epistles. You see, I don't know for sure. I've thought about it, but I haven't made a decision for myself on that yet. But you do see how there's correspondence going on, certainly. For the covenant people of the new Israel, there's a history. So what about the writings? Is there a corresponding body of doctrine, body of literature in the New Testament? Yeah, the epistles, you see. It's the covenant writings. It's commentary on covenant life. And then you have the covenant epilogue. So do you see, is this helpful for showing you how the whole Bible has a structure? For so long, I'd read my Bible and I'm like, okay, I'm in Ezekiel and there are these thrones with spinning wheels and they got fire and they're running around. I don't know what's going on. It fits. It fits in the whole story, okay? All of it does. And a really helpful way, the reason canonics is so helpful, the reason why canonical structure is so helpful is because when you know where it fits and what corresponds to it in the future, then it's really helpful for interpreting it in its whole scriptural context. Does that make sense? I hope that's helpful. Okay. Lastly, what I want to do before we end this is I just want to talk about the message of each of these divisions. It may be helpful for you. It may be helpful for you to keep looking at this appendix because I'm going to be walking through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. I'm going to get some, and then we're going to run out of time inevitably. So I'm not going to be able to get to all of these. But if you're looking at this, you'll be able to see what the story of the Old Testament is. That's my goal. That's what I want to do. Hopefully we can do that in the next, try to do that in the next 6 minutes. Because I want to leave some time for questions. Okay. What's the story of Genesis? In Genesis, you have the creation. And after creation, then you have this terrible thing, the fall. And then you have a promise. The promise is of the seed of a woman. And that is what the whole Old Testament is about. It's about the skull-crushing seed of the serpent. That's a really good article by James Hamilton, The Skull-Crushing Seed of the Serpent. I would recommend you go and read that. In the Old Testament throughout, you see the seed of the serpent and you see the seed of the woman over and over and over again. For example, Jacob and Esau. I don't know. For some reason, I can't think of any others right now. Israel and Egypt. A bunch of seeds of the serpent and the seed of the woman, right? And they're all pointing forward to a coming seed of the woman, the seed of the woman, right? You have the seed of Eve. You have the seed of Abraham. You have the seed of Noah. I just went backwards. You have the seed of David. You have the seed of Solomon. And all of this is the same seed. It's Jesus Christ. But throughout the Old Testament, you see that really God divides the whole creation, the whole human race into two camps. You're either with the seed of the woman or you're with the seed of the serpent. You are the seed of the serpent. You're a child of the devil, you see. So what's going on in Genesis? You have creation. You have the fall. You have this promise that's carried forward through the rest of the Old Testament. After that, you have the flood, which is a picture of our final destruction. The final destruction, of the world. After that, you have the Noahic covenant, and then you have Babylon, which is another picture of judgment. And then you have Abraham. And Abraham is key. If you're going to understand the rest of the Old Testament, you need to understand Abraham. God makes a covenant with Abraham, and his children are the people of Israel. You have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then you have Joshua, all of the children of Jacob who are left in Egypt under slavery. The people of Israel are left in Egypt. That's the point. That's the end of Genesis. And that's where Exodus starts. Exodus is a story about God taking his people from under the dominion of one and bringing them unto the dominion of another. Does that make sense? And that's a picture of salvation. Then they're left in the wilderness. And if someone is going to be in covenant relationship with God, they need a sacrifice, right? So you have the book of Leviticus. You have a whole system that is entirely presupposes the need of shedding of blood if you're going to be in relationship with God. After Leviticus, you have the book of Numbers, which is basically wilderness wanderings. It's a story that is about how the people of Israel can't keep covenant with God. That's what Numbers is about. They grumble. They complain. You have the rebellion of Korah. You have so many violating of the 10 commandments given in Exodus 20 in the book of Numbers when they're wandering around the wilderness. And what happens? Does that first generation make it into the promised land? No. The book of Numbers is about how we can't keep a covenant of works. That's what the book of Numbers is about. And so what's necessary for the people of Israel now that that whole first generation who received the law has died? A second giving of the law. That's what Deuteronomy is about. It's putting a seal on this old covenant in their old covenant relationship. So that's the Torah. Then you have the prophets. And the prophets are broken up into two pieces. You have the former prophets and you have the latter prophets. The former prophets are history, and the latter prophets are commentary. And then you have the writings. I'm sorry, the latter prophets are an indictment against the people of Israel for breaking the law. The writings are commentary from the people about what's going on. Okay, I want to leave a little bit of time for questions because I just got a yellow thingy-dingy. So what questions do you guys have? I can't promise that I can give you any answers. Yes, question. Over here.
Does the fact that like Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah being in writings mean that they're not historical? Even Job, that they're not historical books and more mythological? Or
no, that's a really good question. I think this book does a good job of explaining that very issue. There is historical narrative in the writings. There's no doubt about that, but it's structured in a certain way. I can't remember it, unfortunately. I think it's like it's history, and then the history of Israel is suspended, and then you have commentary on what's going on in the latter prophets, and then more commentary in the writings, and then you have history in the writings. So it does go back and forth, but it falls within the writings because it functions under that heading. So I'll take one more question. Somebody was raising their hand. Yeah, brother.
When you have the 12 here, is that referring to the other prophets?
That's minor prophets, yeah. They called it the 12. And also the 12 fits better into the little box, so that's what I put there. Okay. All right, let's pray. We're very thankful to you, oh God, for revealing your word to us. Thank you for showing us Jesus Christ. We will, if you do not come back, and if we do not turn, but if you keep us, and if we do not die before then, we hope to be learning more about how we can find Jesus Christ in the Old Testament and in the New, and seeing your plans in redemptive history for the rest of our walk with you together as a church. This is an in-house discussion that we're having, and we edify one another and encourage one another, and we just pray that you would bless these studies. Don't let these things just slip away from our fallen minds that can not retain much, but remind us of these things that we learn, and let them not be for just cold, heartless doctrine, but we really, really, really want to find our Savior, our Mediator, Jesus Christ, in your Bible, the whole thing, the Old Testament and the New. And so we pray that you would assist us and be with us in that endeavor. Amen.